welcome back to EH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and we're going to be talking about some of the Doctor Who commanders here. And as I stated in the last video, there is a little bit of controversy here. This, I'll just say this is the first full-on set that we've gotten in Magic in the Universes Beyond realm that doesn't really feel like the traditional Magic. That's the impression I get from a lot of players. Obviously, a lot of people love the show, so they're totally okay with that. You can play these cards or not, but as I talked about in the last video, you got to be aware of these, right? You have to be aware of these cards because they're going to be legal in the Commander format, and you're going to see them all the time. I already talked about the 99 cards, a bunch that we're going to see in the format for sure. And even if you don't want to play any of these cards, you're going to see them in Commander games, and the same is true for Commanders. We got a ton of Commanders from this set. 76, I believe. That is putting it up there in like the top 3 or 4 sets all time. So we got a bunch. I'm going to do this a little bit differently than I normally do because of the set that we got, but also because of that Doctor's Companion ability, which is sort of throwing things for a little bit of a loop. Of course, that works with all the Doctors. I'm not going to get into it too much. I'm going to talk about a few commanders that I do think are really neat build around, some of my favorites from the set. But again, just like with the last video, I'm going to talk about those impactful cards, those cards that you have to be aware of, whether or not you're going to be using them in your decks or you're just going to be seeing them in games. And again, as I talked about in the last video, there's a lot of these cards from this set that are doing, when you do this thing happens, reactionary, triggered abilities, whatever you want to call it, or replacement effects where you're doing this thing instead. It's just doing this very transformative thing in a game, depending on the theme you're playing, that can be really impactful. So those are the ones that I'm going to talk about. I'm not really going to talk about a lot of these cards as commanders. Obviously, they can be your commander. I'm going to be talking about a lot of them mostly in the 99, because that is maybe where I think probably the majority of these are going to be more impactful. So Astrid Peth, 1 and a white, human 2/2, legendary creature. Talked about this one already. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, create a food token. So it is a white card creating a food token. So if you're in a white food-themed deck, for which I'm sure there's a few commanders out there already doing that, this can fit. But more importantly, whenever you sacrifice a clue or food, Astrid Peth explores. So there's a whole lot going on here. But of course, just like I talked about with Academy Manufactor and how that is just going to be a card that's going to go in every food, clue, or treasure deck because it just gives you great value. Even though it's a colorless option, this is a white one that is going to be doing something similar where, well, if I'm in a deck where I'm doing clue or food, it's just going to give me free value. I get to explore every time I sacrifice one of them. And I have a Denic deck. I might have to find room for this card, even though, it's kind of a little bit of a weird fit, I guess, but it is working really well because I'm doing clues. I'm sacrificing them a lot. It's giving me free value. I might want to find room for this card in that deck, right? That's what I'm talking about where, yeah, you can build a deck around this, but I think it's going to go in the 99 of a lot of decks. Same thing for Dan Lewis. This is a very interesting one. 1 and a red human. And I will also point out these are kind of cheap, so very easy to fit in there. It's a 2/2 and has that Doctor's Companion ability, which, again, I'm not going to get into it all. In fact, going forward, any of these legendary creatures that have the Doctor's Companion ability, I will completely ignore. So they'll go with the Doctors if you're already building a Doctor deck. And again, as I already talked about, you'd be silly not to. It would be like playing a partner without a partner, right? You could do it, but you're getting a lot more advantage in adding this because not only you're getting access to more colors, you're also getting access to more abilities. And this guy's got a really unique, interesting one. So non-creature, non-equipment artifacts you control are equipment in addition to their other types and have equipped creature gets +1/+0 and equip 1. So it's not a replacement effect, but it's just imbuing this very impactful, powerful ability on equipment or not equipment, I guess, non-creature, non-equipment. It's turning them into equipment, right? And this is funny enough, there is a card that already does something like this, but now we have a legendary creature that's doing it. Again, you can build a deck around this, but this also is very impactful in that it can probably go in a lot of decks. Where exactly this one goes, I'm not sure. So you're turning your non-creature, so my Arcane Signet now becomes an equipment, and it can attach to my creatures and give them +1/+0, and right. If you're in a deck that one of those commanders, and I can think of a few in red that have the cheat equip. Now I can just turn all my mana rocks into equipment and just zip, attach them all to my commander or whatever, right? So that's the kind of stuff where I'm talking about, where this card could actually be really impactful outside of actually being a commander. Let's talk about Barbara Wright, another, funny enough, 2-mana commander. These guys are all cheap. Can be your commander, can also be a doctor's companion, but has this very impactful, I don't know what to call it. It's not a replacement effect. It's just imbuing this ability on things that you already are doing, which is sagas you control have read ahead. So if I'm in any deck that's doing that, now all my sagas have read ahead. That's a very powerful, impactful thing to have if you're in a Saga Tribal deck, right? Because as they enter the battlefield, you can choose a chapter to start with. You can skip ahead on chapters, which I haven't done the research, but I'm sure there's some sagas from back in the day that skipping ahead to the last chapter might be really, really good. So that is a very impactful card in the commander format for that reason, outside of the fact that, yes, it is a commander. You should be aware that this card exists, whether it be, I want to actually throw it in my Saga Tribal deck, or even if I don't want to play these cards, I should be aware that this card exists because that is very impactful. Let's look at Danny Pink, 3 and a blue, Human Soldier Advisor 4/3, has Mentor. Creatures you control have, whenever one or more counters are put on a creature, for the first time each turn, draw a card. So, of course, again, this can be your commander, but this is going to go in the 99 of a ton of decks. If there's any commanders out there that are putting +1/+1 counters on their creatures, this is going to be an auto-include because it's just going to give you a card draw. Just a Simic +1/+1 counter themes in general. This is going to go in a ton of the 99 of decks. So, again, maybe you don't love these Doctor Who cards, but you got a Simic +1/+1 counter deck, and it's like, man, that's really tough not to include this in there because it's fantastic in the 99, right? That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. How about Joe Grant, 2 and a white, Human Soldier. Each historic card in your hand has cycling 2 and a white. So again, any of those themes, this is going to fit nicely into. And whenever you cycle a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Joe Grant. Either theme of, obviously those play into each other, but if I'm in a deck where I just have, maybe Artifact Tribal, Saga Tribal again, this just gives all of those cards cycling. If I draw that Arcane Signet and I don't want it, 2 and a white, I cycle it away and draw something more impactful. Maybe I'm already in a cycling deck in white. And again, has that impactful ability of just imbuing this ability on things we're already doing, right? That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Let's talk about Iraxa, Empress of Mars, 2 red, Alien Warrior 5/4 with Trample and Battle Cry. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, create a 2/2 red Alien Warrior creature token. So again, I've talked about this in the last video where they have this big theme in this set of whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand. And of course, that works with Exile, Tribal, Flashback, cast stuff from your library. It works with a lot of stuff. Suspend cards, Foretell. There's a lot of decks that are doing stuff like this. I recently talked about the Madness theme that works with Exile as well, right? Because when you have a Madness card, you are discarding it into Exile and casting it from Exile. So you are casting it from anywhere other than your hand. That will trigger this guy. So I can build around a deck that's doing that, but this guy's mono red. It's going to limit what I can do. There's a lot more decks that are going to want this guy in the 99. Like that Prosper deck, very popular commander that I'm casting lots of stuff from Exile. I'm getting a treasure token. Why not also get a 2/2 red Alien Warrior creature token as well, right? This seems like a pretty good card there. Ramona II, 3 and a white. Time Lord Scientist 3/3 with Vigilance. 1 and tap. Create a tap token that's a copy of target token that entered the battlefield this turn. There's an ability that fits in a whole lot of themes, of course, token themes. I create a treasure token, I can pay 1 and create another one if I want to. Maybe that's not great value, maybe it is. Maybe I just have a token theme in general, like my Benny Brax deck, where I'm just creating whatever kind of token. I'm creating lots of kinds of tokens in that deck. I just pay 1, create another one, because I just had it enter the battlefield. That's pretty great value. It's almost Panharmonicon-ish. You got to pay the 1, but you're basically getting double the effect. Something enters the battlefield, I pay 1 and get another one. So again, couldn't be your commander, but fits in the 99 of a ton of decks, I'm sure. Let's talk about Rassilon the War President. 3 blue and a black Time Lord Noble. 3/4, beginning your upkeep, you lose 2 life and exile top card of your library. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. So you're doing an impulse draw here. A little weird for a blue and black deck, but whatever. The important part here is each non-creature spell you cast from exile has Conspire. So again, there's that important part. And this can be your commander. Obviously, it's blue and black. So now because we are in multicolored, it gets a little harder. Like again, all the stuff I've talked about previously, all monocolored stuff. So it's very easy for me to slot that into the 99 of decks. Gets a little harder here, but if you're in any deck that is casting stuff from exile and is in blue and black colors, maybe I want this in there. You know, I mean, the first ability is okay, but each non-creature spell I cast from exile has Conspire, which of course means as you cast a spell, you may tap 2 untapped creatures you control that share a color with it. And if you do, you copy it. So just great value off of what I'm doing already. So this might fit in the 99 of a lot of decks as well. Here's a really interesting one. Vizlor Turlo, 3 and a black, rogue, 2/5. And now I'm starting to get into the commanders that they're not just great in the 99, they also could be really interesting build-arounds. I'm saving the more, my favorite build-around ones towards the end. So when Vizlor Turlo enters the battlefield, you may have an opponent gain control of it. If you do, it's goaded for as long as they control it. I suppose the important wording here, like this is not like a Xantia where you have to have it under your opponent's control. Here, when it enters the battlefield, you can choose. It actually is a may, so I can keep it if I want to, and you might want to, because at the beginning of your end step, draw a card. Then you lose life equal to the number of cards in your hand. So you can just have this enter the battlefield and then you draw a card, but you're going to lose life equal to the number of cards in your hand. So it's going to hit hard. And of course, that's why you might want your opponent to have it. It also has Doctor's Companion. So of course you can team it up with a doctor, and it's very easy to add black to your doctor that you're already playing. And then also have this in the command zone. Again, this is why I don't love the Doctor's Companion mechanic a whole lot, because of course I get that it's thematic, guys, and the flavor, it's a flavor win for the Doctor Who fans. But again, just being objective here, I just get to add black to my deck. And then on top of that, I have this guy sitting in the command zone that I can later on I can cast it and keep it if I really need to draw cards desperately, or I can cast it and donate it to my opponent and just help close out the game, because they're just going to lose. If they have cards in hand, they're just going to lose a bunch of life on their end step. As a build around though, again, in the 99, this is, I think, an auto-include in an Ekussar deck. Again, if you haven't been paying attention to this set because you're not a big Doctor Who person, this is just an auto-include in a Ekussar deck, because, you know, whoever the guy is, the biggest threat, or the guy who maybe is in the life gain deck who is fending off my damage that I'm dealing from my commander, now I donate this to them. And not only are they going to be drawing cards, which I want, but they're also going to take a huge chunk of life from the cards they have in hand. So just a great fit in that deck. Any deck where you want your opponents to be drawing cards, and any deck where you're in maybe a political theme as well. I mean, there's just a lot of neat ways to use this card. And again, as a build around, it could be a really neat, you could build a mono black deck with this guy as a build around and make a pretty neat deck, I think. A really neat one. You know, the politics, the donate theme, all that kind of stuff. I think that this guy's really interesting. All right, moving on again to the more, you know, again, probably fits in the 99 of a few decks, but really interesting build around as well. And one of the first doctors I'm talking about here, the 9th Doctor, 1 blue and a red, Time Lord Doctor 2/4 with haste. Whenever the 9th Doctor becomes untapped, during your untap step, you get an additional upkeep step after this step. So this is a Paradox Haze in the command zone, sort of. Of course, you have to have it tapped. That's why it has haste. So you can play it, immediately attack with it, and then it'll untap. And of course, you're going to have your untap first. When it untaps, during your untap step, of course, it has to untap the old-fashioned way. You can't use a 1,000-year elixir or anything here. Your upkeep, which follows your untap, obviously, you'll get an additional upkeep after this step. So you're going to get 2 upkeeps. That's a very interesting build around. And funny enough, a lot of people have done this. They've done the Paradox Haze, you know, upkeep tribal thing. I've seen a few 5-color decks that are upkeep tribal, where it's just, I have stuff that triggers on my upkeep, right? I have a Phyrexian Arena, which on my upkeep, I get to draw a card. And if I have 2 upkeeps, I get to draw another card, right? That's the kind of stuff you can do here. Can't do black. Well, I guess you can do black if you do that black Doctor's Companion guy. Again, that's why I don't love it, but whatever. You can have this guy and just do a upkeep tribal deck. I mean, again, this can fit in the 99 of those decks. It can also fit in the 99 of any commander. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but if you have a blue and red commander that already has an upkeep trigger, again, I say the same thing about Paradox Haze, where if I have a blue commander that has an upkeep trigger, why wouldn't you put that in there? Here, blue and red commander with an upkeep trigger, I can just probably or likely get another upkeep trigger off my commander. If I'm doing the upkeep tribal thing, I can throw this guy in there, obviously, because it's another Paradox Haze option, or I can just do upkeep tribal with this guy. And, you know, that's with the kind of the neat way as I go down the rabbit hole and I find all those really neat trigger on your upkeep cards that I can put in this deck. And of course, I will get 2 triggers because my commanders give me 2 upkeeps. Pretty neat. All right, the Master formed anew, blue and a black Time Lord Rogue 01. When you cast this spell, you may exile a creature you control and put a takeover counter on it. So the wording there is very specific. And again, I've talked about this in rules videos before, like with Atrata and stuff like that, where when you're exiling something and putting a counter on it, there's a very specific reason why you're doing that, because likely, with which what we're going to see here, you're going to be referencing specifically those cards in exile with those counters on them, which is what this is doing. You may have the Master formed anew enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature card in exile with a takeover counter on it. So, as our commander dies, I can now reference something else. So there's already reference something with those takeover counters on it. Let's say I got a Blightsteel Colossus, right? It's a great example to go to. I got a Blightsteel Colossus. I'm going to exile it with my Master formed anew. That's why they have the wording when you cast this spell. So I'm casting it, I exile my Blightsteel Colossus. Then when it resolves, it's going to enter the battlefield and I get the copy, the Blightsteel Colossus. Then if my opponent path to exiles my commander, which is a Blightsteel Colossus, it goes to the command zone. And when I recast it, I've already got a Blightsteel Colossus in exile with a takeover counter, so here it comes again. What this is essentially allowing you to do is play a secret commander deck. This is why I really like this guy a lot. I think it's pretty interesting, and I just talked about this in my 10 deck ideas video, which I don't think I've actually come out with yet. The whole secret commander thing. I mean, there's a lot you can do here, but the main thing that you're doing here is this guy now becomes a secret commander, where I want to build my deck around Blightsteel Colossus. I'll continue to use that as an example. And because I've exiled it with a takeover counter on it, this guy now allows me, no matter how many times my commander dies, it's going to go back to the command zone, and then I can recast it. And when it enters the battlefield, I can exile a new creature if I want to, but I don't have to. You may exile a creature you control and put a takeover counter on it, and I can continue to do so. I can exile other things, and every time, maybe I can blink my commander, and every time it comes into play as a different creature, I can do that, right? I can have a creature. I mean, there's a lot of neat things you can do here. I can have a creature in exile that is, has hexproof. My opponent, maybe they got removal they're going to use. I mean, I guess if I blinked my commander, that would already be the case. But again, I got that Blightsteel Colossus in exile with a takeover counter on it, but I'm copying something else currently. Maybe I'm copying my Arcanist because I want to tap my commander to draw 3 cards. Then my opponent casts a board wipe. I cast that instant speed blink spell, blink my commander. It comes back into play when it enters the battlefield. Now I'm copying the Blightsteel Colossus because it's indestructible and my commander will be saved from the board wipe. There's a lot of neat things you can do here. Blinking might be a great option, but the really neat way to use this card is there's just one creature that I really want. I have that secret commander. I want a Blightsteel Colossus deck. I'm building this as that. As soon as I do this, as soon as I exile my Blightsteel Colossus with a takeover counter on it, now for the rest of the game, and this guy's pretty cheap, I can keep recasting my commander. If my opponent gets my Blightsteel Colossus off the battlefield, I can recast my commander and it will become a Blightsteel Colossus again. Secret commander. Really neat way to use this guy. All right, River Song, 1 blue, red, human Time Lord, rogue, 2/2. You draw cards from the bottom of your library rather than the top. Whenever an opponent scries, surveils, or searches their library, put a +1/+1 counter on River Song. Then River Song deals damage to that player equal to its power. So this is one of the first commanders spoiled from the set. I'm sure we've all seen it already. I've already talked about it in a video. This might be the most popular one from the set. I think they might even be playing this in CDH. Hard to say because of these are actual characters. It's hard to say which one's going to be the most popular because people might play it because it's a certain character, not necessarily because it's a great commander. So that plays into it as well. But if I said this is going to be the most popular commander from the set, I might be right. If you said that, I would say, yeah, you probably would be right. It's likely. It's very unique. It's doing something very interesting we've never seen before with that meet in reverse ability, obviously drawing off the bottom of your deck, but also it has a very powerful ability and a very neat one where you can, and again, I talk about this in my 10 deck ideas video coming up about this commander and the neat things that you can do here. So I won't talk about it at length here. Let's move on. The War Doctor, also going to be a really popular one in the format. Unfortunately, not for the reason I was hoping. So 2 red and a white, Time Lord Doctor 3/5, whenever one or more other permanents phase out, and whenever one or more other cards are put into exile from anywhere, put a time counter on the War Doctor. So the really neat part, and I talked about this already, that I really love about this guy is that whenever one or more permanents phase out, and of course you can go down the rabbit hole and do that and put a Crystal Golem in this deck or something like that. That's the neat way. But then they add on the whenever one or more other cards are put into exile from anywhere, which of course is super easy to do in this deck and is happening very often in other decks as well, which now I don't really need to build around that phase out part at all because it's way easier to just have things put into exile from anywhere. Like I could just exile my opponent's graveyard and that's stuff being put into exile from anywhere. And then I'm going to put the time counter on it. And as people have already pointed out, and again, getting back to the whole Doctor's Companion thing being really, really busted, I can now take that black Doctor's Companion and add it to this guy and then put a Necropotence in this deck, and seems really powerful. I mean, let's play this through the scenario here. Necropotence, of course, I'm sure we're familiar with it. Black, black, black. Enchantment, skip your draw step. Whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard, which funny enough, that works with the War Doctor because it is being exiled from anywhere. It's being exiled from your graveyard. More importantly, though, you can pay 1 life and exile the top card of your library face down, put that card into your hand at the beginning of your next end step. And of course, Necropotence is already a super busted card. A lot of people don't consider it casual. A lot of people want it to be banned. It is likely, you could easily make the argument it's the best card draw option ever. And it is exiling the top card of your library. So of course it works with the War Doctor, and more importantly, the wording, right? The wording is whenever one or more other cards are put in exile anywhere. So if I Bajuka Bog my opponent's graveyard, I'm exiling like 20 cards all at once. This is only going to trigger once because it's one or more. It's going to put a counter on my Doctor, 1 time counter on my War Doctor. With Necropotence, though, because pay 1 life and, colon do that thing is the activation, I'm doing it once. So those are separate instances. Every time I pay 1 life and exile card from my library, that puts a time counter on this guy. And again, not only am I drawing an insane amount of cards, but I can just load up the time counters on my Doctor. And what else is it doing? It's not just doing that. Whenever the War Doctor attacks, it deals damage equal to the number of time counters on it to any target. If a creature dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile instead, which is great, but of course you're not going to do that. You're just going to Necropotence, put 40 counters on your War Doctor, then attack your opponent and one-shot them to the face, right? So, I mean, you are paying life, so you can't just pay 40 life and one-shot your opponents because then you'll be dead. You'll have to work around that, but this seems pretty darn good, right? It seems like I can very easily, with a card like Necropotence and probably a lot of other cards as well, I can very easily pile counters on this guy and just go face to my opponents. This guy's super powerful to the point where, again, we might even see him in CEDH games for that reason. It's unfortunate. I like the phases out thing. That part I got really excited about. The other part about exiling is so easy to do. It's hard to avoid that, right? All right, moving on to the Master Multiplied. 4 black and a red Time Lord Rogue 4/3 with Myriad. The legend rule doesn't apply to creature tokens you control. So we've actually seen this before. It's on Kadric. Just like I said with that commander, there's a lot you can do there. Of course, it's going to play into the other abilities on this card, but now I can just create token copies with a Flame Shadow Conjuring or something, create token copies of my legendary creatures that the legend rule doesn't apply to my tokens, so I'm not going to have to worry about losing them. I just get an extra copy of my legendary creature that I can immediately attack with right away. So that's already build aroundable. The Myriad is also build aroundable and also plays into that ability where I can just attack with my Master Multiplied. And when I Myriad and create those token copies, they're going to stick around. And again, in the 99, this might be very important, but there's so much to build around here. I think that's going to make for a unique, interesting commander. Just that alone, a lot to build around, but also triggered abilities you control can't cause you to sacrifice or exile creature tokens you control. And again, as I've talked about already in this video and the other one, there's so many of these effects that are just these really impactful effects that we've never seen before, that you just do the deep dive of how many other cards this ability is going to affect and be really impactful. Again, I just talked about Flame Shadow Conjuring, where that's going to exile the token that you're creating. Uh-oh, not with this guy, right? This guy is saying triggered abilities you control can't cause you to sacrifice or exile creature tokens, right? So anyone a little confused about this, and as I've talked about in rules videos recently, can't also always beats everything else. If something says can't, that means it ain't happening. It is going to stick around. That is incredibly powerful in a lot of scenarios. And of course, also works with the Myriad, where I'm going to attack with my commander, right? You don't even have to put anything in this deck. Funny enough, you could probably make a Voltron deck or something with this guy. I'm going to attack with my commander. I create the token copies. And of course, Myriad is doing that same thing where it exiles it at the end of combat, I think. They're not going to get legend ruled away because my commander's shutting that part off. And they're also not going to get exiled at the end of combat. So they will stick around. And then when I do it the next turn, we can start doing some math here. Things get out of hand really, really quickly. And then, of course, all the other things that it works with Encore, right? I mean, there's just so many things that this will work with. Anything that is going to exile or sacrifice, that to me is the really, really important part, is anything that is creating a token that get exiled on the end step or sacrificed on the end step, any of that will get shut off, so it will stick around, right? Really, really important. And people would typically use those Sundial of the Infinite effects to make sure it sticks around. Again, Obeka, the end turn commander, does that a lot. Here's another commander that you can do it with, but maybe even better, where I don't even have to do anything. It just shuts it off. There's just so much going on with this commander, and that ability is so impactful that I'm sure there's a lot of directions you can go with it. And again, could probably fit in the 99 of a lot of decks. All right, ending off with my favorite two commanders, just as build around. Again, now we're getting more to, I think these are great build arounds. Idris Soul of the TARDIS, 1 blue and a red, human incarnation, 3/3, vanishing 3. When Idris Soul of the TARDIS enters the battlefield, exile another artifact you control until it leaves the battlefield. It has all activated and triggered abilities of the exiled card and gets +X, where X is the card's mana value. So I already talked about this in a spoiler video, and as I talked about in that video, I don't really care about the +X. It's a nice little added bonus where if I exile something, it's just going to make my commander bigger. It's harder to kill. It's a better blocker. I guess I could attack with it, but I'm looking for the really neat, interesting things that I can turn my commander into. And again, the vanishing 3 is not great, but blinking works here. And this is just like the other guy, the blue-black master guy, where you're going to want to put blinking in this deck for this doubly so, because I can get around the vanishing 3 part, which is not great, but also because I'm blinking, I have this ETB and I can constantly switch my commander into other things. So you're going to want to be doing that as well. And I just love the deep dive. You know, again, this might be maybe one that I go after myself, where I can do the deep dive and find some really neat artifacts to turn my commander into, because I can think of a few off the top of my head that would be really interesting for sure. And I'm sure a lot of other people have as well. This is for sure one of the most interesting build arounds from this set. I think probably the most interesting or the best build around from this set, though, is the 13th Doctor. This is my pick for best build around because there is 2 abilities here that I think are fantastic build arounds. 1 blue and a green, Time Lord Doctor 2/2. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So there, we just have a fantastic ability that we can build around very easily. You are in the +1/+1 counter theme. So again, that guy that I just talked about, the blue guy, where I'm putting counter. If I have a commander that's putting counters on stuff, I want that guy in the deck. I can find all those creatures like that Incubation Druid that want counters on them. Maybe a Cold-Eyed Selkie, where that's a creature that you wouldn't maybe think of in a +1/+1 counter theme, but it draws you cards equal to the damage it deals, so you want it to be bigger. So that would be a good fit here because I can make it bigger, draw more cards. So that's the kind of stuff that you can put in here. But of course, I'm casting stuff from anywhere other than my hand, so I can do all of that here. I can do suspend, flashback, cast from my library, cast from exile, all that. Foretell works here. I could put all the Foretell cards in here in blue and green, which there are a bunch. So already I have an ability that I can do a ton of different things with and go in a ton of different directions. But also at the beginning of your end step, untap each creature you control with a counter on it, which of course works with the first ability with the counters, but the very specific wording here is with a counter on it. So I can put other counters in here. I can do the time counter thing. Again, we're just opening a huge Pandora's box of all the different directions I can go with just that ability alone. I am untapping my creatures. I talked about Lulu at length in a couple of videos where there's so much you can do there, where you're putting counters on your creatures and you're also untapping them. So I can put creatures that put counters on themselves, creatures that are untapping for various reasons or tapping for various reasons. I can just throw an Arcanus the Omnipotent in this deck, put a counter on it with the first ability, tap to draw 3 cards, then it untaps on my end step and I can draw 3 more cards on my opponent's turn, right? Again, there's just the endless amount of ways you can build this commander, on top of the fact that, of course, because it's a doctor, I can have a doctor's companion. Again, you don't need the help here. There's so many directions to go with this commander. I don't need a doctor's companion, but I can. If I want to add red or white or black, I can do that as well. This to me is, both with what it's doing and the directions you can go, I think the best build around commander from this set. You guys let me know what you think in the comments below. What are your favorite commanders? Are you going to be building around any of these? Are you going to be loving it because you love this set? Or are you going to be loving it because you love the show and you also love the set? Or maybe you're not going to touch these because you don't really like the Universes Beyond thing. Whatever variation thereof, let me know in the comments below, and what your favorite commanders from this set are that maybe I didn't give a mention. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.